Welcome once again to 247 Real Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Julian Perry. It's Wednesday, March 22nd when I'm recording this episode. It's around 20 minutes after 9 p.m. It's a pleasure to be here with you once again. I'm going to chat a little bit about when the powerful manipulate the masses. And this is a thought that was triggered by the recent events of this past week that are going on in New York. So, when I come back, we'll chat a bit about this. So, welcome back to the 247 Real Talk Podcast. As I said, it's a pleasure to be here with you. It's always a privilege and a pleasure to be here with you, to share my thoughts, to chat, to get your feedback once the episodes have aired. I'm thankful to my listeners on the audio side from Buzzsprout and all your favorite podcast apps. I'm extremely thankful for those viewers on YouTube who will continue to support the channel. I invite you to continue to subscribe and share it with your friends so we can build this moment of truth and revelation and share it with others so that the conversation can get bigger and more involved, and we can discuss our opinions, what we think is right or wrong, and make a difference in our lives and the lives of generations to come. So what triggered what I think is going to be a short episode this week is what's going on right now in New York. And I want to make sure that you understand that this episode is not about President Biden or President Trump. It's about Washington, D.C., the political machine, and how they manipulate the masses, how our lives are toys for them to play with. And many of us allow them to get into our minds that far, so we become real puppets. So last week, President Trump announced that he was going to be arrested Tuesday, and have to come to New York to be arrested. I think he wanted to get ahead of whatever he thought was going on in New York. Or maybe he was right and then it was purposely delayed because, he made that announcement. But it's not about that. I'm not here to get into the argument of who is right and who is wrong in terms of that, because that's exactly what Washington wants us to do. The politicians that we've elected, I think sometimes they sit in a room together and hit their glasses of champagne together as they watch and see how much of the population they can get to fight it against each other. And I think it likens itself to if you've ever watched some of those television shows, I mean, they're mostly fictitious, I would hope so, where they're rich people who live out on these great acres of land, and they get prisoners and those type of people brought to their location, and then loose them in the Everglades or wherever it is in the bush and hunt them and get joy out of destroying other human beings. Well, it's similar to what the people we elected in government. It's similar to what they're doing with us. So I'm gonna say a few things. Some of them are gonna be maybe controversial. Some of them maybe gonna hurt some people's feelings. But at the end of the day, they need to be said. They're the truth. Whether a prosecutor decides to charge someone or indict someone, especially in this case, is not an individual choice by itself. It starts with having the grand jury, called to sit and listen to the evidence in the case. The decision to indict given by the grand jury or not to is based on a vote by these members of the grand jury. So it's not one person making a decision. The whole point of the grand jury is to bring a level of fairness into the process, right? So if you have enough random people from society sitting, it's a large number of people, then I don't remember what the exact number is. I'm not even sure if the number is consistent, but I've been to one of these. I've testified in one of these situations, and so I understand that there were a lot of people sitting in front of me, and they're listening to the evidence, and then they vote at the end. And if they vote not to indict, then I believe in most cases the prosecutor follows that. If you wanted to, jump and yell, that this is a witch hunt or something like that, then it would be a case where the grand jury votes not to indict, and there's some ability, and I'm not sure. I'm saying some ability because I'm not sure whether it exists or not, for the indictment to be handed down anyway. But my point is, to all the masses in America, to the 8 and 750 and 150 million people who voted in the last election, how many of you, how many of us are really impacted and affected by what happens here? When people take it upon themselves to be so invested in a person that they travel across country to a different state to protest on that person's behalf, I've got to ask, is there something personal here? No. Do you think that person that you're risking your life for actually makes decisions that benefit you? No. They make decisions that benefit a certain section of society, and it's usually the wealthy. And the people who are marching and the people who are protesting on their behalf are usually not wealthy. I don't know when we human beings got to the point where we felt it was okay to get violent and fight and protest and call in bomb threats and all that because someone in government is being indicted. If you or not say being indicted, but being investigated, and has the possibility of being indicted. I looked at some of the comments of some of my friends on Facebook and how personal they're taking this, and they're not addressing the issue at hand. Their response to what's happening in New York is, oh, look at Biden and his son. Look at the issue in China and some money that was transferred to Biden's son or whatever. And the fact is that I believe those issues will face similar consequences at some point with the grand jury. And the grand jury will hear the evidence and determine whether that's the case or not. But the point is, the people who are saying this on Facebook, the people who are angry and lashing out, have no clue what the facts are. They're listening to propaganda from the news. You listen to Fox News, you hear one thing. You listen to CNN, you listen to one thing. You listen to NBC, you hear all these different stations have their agenda and have a way that they broadcast the news, because at the end of the day, they're looking for ratings, and ratings don't come with boredom. Ratings come with controversy. Controversy is something that human beings inherently seek. Most human beings. People will tell you when you meet them, I just want a peaceful, quiet life. But the fact is, we look for controversy. Have you ever seen what they call, rubbernecking on the highway? Where there's an accident on the other side of the highway, and the side that has no accident is going on the crawl because everybody on that side wants to see what's going on this side. We crave that. Most of the time, if you'll see a man walking down or a woman walking down the street rocking a baby, lovingly, nobody sees that. That's not news. That's not interesting. We ever see when there's a shooting or a stabbing or something, all these masses of people who are there gather around and they're peeking, they're looking for the blood and the knife and whatever happened. That's what we're seeking. In many cases, we've had situations where people stand there with their cell phones recording rather than help the victim. My point is, we're all being manipulated, and we're allowing ourselves to be manipulated. I want the people the 70-something million people who voted for President Trump to tell me how he personally makes a difference in their life. Because most of the time, the decisions even that are made by Congress, right? They're made by a body of people. I want the 80-something million people who voted for President Biden to tell me how he single-handedly impacted their lives, how If it was Biden or Obama or Clinton, what difference would it have made to them? Nothing. The only difference that matters is the policies. If it were Reagan or Bush or Bush Sr., right, or Trump, what would it have mattered? They're based on an ideology, a political ideology. So when we get to the point where we kill each other, we argue each other, we lose friendships, we go to the Capitol and scale walls, we're ready to attack each other, we have motorcades or with trucks, and we block places and we call bomb threats in. Because we have an issue with something that's going on with a person that we don't even personally know. Again, most of the people who find themselves in a serious situation, most of the people who have gone to court from January 6th and are spending 7, 5, and 3 years in jail have never seen President Trump, never spoken to him individually, never been able to sit down with him and to tell him their personal grievances and their struggles and get a helping hand from him. And the same thing goes with President Biden. These are people who we elect to run the nation. They don't know us individually. And be honest with you, I'll look at this camera and I'll tell you, they don't care about you even individually. Most of the time, their thoughts and what they care about when they become president and what they do once they become president is two different things. Most of the politicians we elect, same thing. Even the brand new ones, they have this gusto about them. They're going to go in and make a difference, and then all of a sudden they realize that this machine is bigger than they are, and they become part of it because they love the power, they love the attention, they love the perks, and the people who put them there are long forgotten. We have to stop letting politicians manipulate us. We have to start saying that we, the masses, can unite and make them dance to the beat of our drum, not the other way around. We have barricades going up in New York and the police department all over the place waiting for if an indictment comes down to deal with any issues that jump off. And the fact is, there will be issues because people will leave their homes. Someone will leave their home because they're angry that, let's say hypothetically, there's a decision to indict. They will leave their home because they're against the decision. They feel strongly enough to leave their home, go out on the street, protest in a violent way, and possibly lose their life. When they lose their life, their family's left to mourn. Their family's left to hurt. Maybe they were the breadwinner. All because of what? Because of someone, when their tour or their term as president over, they don't remember us one bit. Very few people get an individual audience with a president or a member of Congress where the memory of them is everlasting, where the impact impacts not just one life but the masses of people, which is why we elect officials. You want to argue about ideology, Republican, Democrat, or whatever, that's a different conversation. What I'm saying here is put the Democrat aside, put the Republican aside. Make sure that what we're doing is for the betterment of all people. Yes, you may have differences in ideology, but the power of humankind is to come together and find a compromise where the majority can exist and thrive and live. This angriness and this hatred that I see, as I said, on Facebook, people I've known for years, I look at them differently because I can't understand the words coming out of their mouths. The words that just are full of hate for people they don't know. And then we need to be true to ourselves too. Because half of the people that I see saying things, I shake my head because they're not logical. You don't know. None of us truly knows. We're not on the grand jury. We're not an investigator. We're not a police officer. We're not even politicians, most of us. So the true details of what happened in this specific case, we don't know. The other thing that bothers me is, how do we choose who we rise up for and why? 2 episodes ago, last episode and the episode before that, I focused on the execution of people wrongfully executed. There, 2 weeks ago, I talked about Arthur Brown Jr., who was a man of color who was executed in Texas, and the one of these Innocence projects. I forgot the name of it at the moment. It'll come to me. The Texas something it's called, but they showed all this evidence that was overwhelmingly adding doubt to his guilt. Matter of fact, they actually showed someone else committed the crime, and the politicians and the government and the people in Texas who had the choice put him to death. They didn't even pause. They didn't even say, you know what, let's delay his, since this came up. And again, all these things were revealed and presented in January of 2023. So after COVID, this project, it took on his case, brought these things to light. So it isn't like if they've been trying to do this for years. They just got this case. If you decide to, you know what, let's hear all this evidence, let's really consider, let's stay this man's execution for 30 days. Maybe we'll find a reason enough or reasonable doubt, even if we're not 100% sure, let's at least, let's move it to life imprisonment at some point as we continue to dig. But they executed him. And the next day, while I was driving home and waiting to hear if he was executed, I heard of the other case. I think his name was Sheldon Thomas, and forgive me if I'm calling the wrong name, but he spent 18 years in jail because he had the same name or shared the same name with someone else, with the actual person who did it had the same name, different address, looked differently, but they accepted, there's some resemblance here, so lock him up for 18 years. Now they found out they had the wrong man. I mean, and I'm saying to you, why I'm bringing this up is, where was the outrage? These cases were in the news. These cases were all over the news. Where were the protests? Where were the people marching in the streets and saying, we're not going to allow you to execute another one of us wrongfully? Especially when you look at the circumstances and details of the case and you realize how flawed they were. In the case of, there's a case of someone else I called, forgive me if I can't quote the names, but he spent 64 years in jail and he was innocent. He wasn't even allowed to have his witnesses who could have corroborated his story and could have proven that he was in a different place at a different time when the crime occurred. He wasn't allowed to present any of his witnesses. These are the injustices that we should be marching the street for. These are the injustices that we should be traveling and getting out of our beds and going to the Capitol for. These are the injustices that we should be saying, you know what, if I go down there and I lose my life, I went down there to save the life of another. We should not be fighting and arguing and willing to hurt each other and kill each other over someone who's sitting with millions of dollars in public office who doesn't give a crap about you or me. Doesn't matter what your ideology is. If it's hard for you to believe that and understand that, well, you need to take yourself into some quiet place and think about it and recognize the truth. Here we are in a city that's a melting pot, and they got a grand jury together. And if that grand jury hears the evidence and all the details that you and I would never be privy to, and they decide that there's no case, then they should vote that way, and they probably will. If they decide that after they've heard the evidence he should be indicted, then he should be. And all of us should be sitting there quietly waiting for the case to play out to see what was done. What is it that we can't? I know it's hard for us to accept the fact that when we choose these human beings as heroes, and then when they betray us, we can't believe they possibly would. So we rationalize everything in our minds. I don't see people marching in the streets because they believe that Jesus lives. I don't see people marching in the streets when they see wrongs done to other people because they believe that it's the inhumane thing to do. I don't see people traveling to Washington and bringing motorcades in and all these things when there's a travesty of justice to an ordinary person. But here we are, a nation divided, fighting against each other for politicians who I can promise you don't care about us. All they care about is our vote. It may be hard for you to believe. The fact is that the system is designed where there are times when you can have a Republican in office and a time when you can have a Democrat in office. You can believe in Republican ideology and maybe how your life is designed and how your finances is designed. You do better under one ideology than the other. That does not mean that those are grounds for hatred and for spewing anger. I have a friend of mine I often refer to. I still don't call his name because I don't want to put him on blast, so to speak. But he wrote something in Facebook today, and I think it was today, and I read it, and it left me pondering. He talked about the Central Park Five, and I wish I could. And if you give me a second here, as I'm speaking, I'm going to try to look it up because I really don't want to misquote him. But it was something that I needed to read, and I wish I had kept it. Okay, here we go. So we have the district attorney, Alvin Bragg, and I guess it comes down to him, depending on what the grand jury says, of whether to indict. But my friend talked about the fact that, the Central Park Five were these 5 young black men who were convicted of rape and later on exonerated. So much so that their gates on Central Park that are now called the gates of the exonerated. What my friend pointed out, and I'm looking at this because I didn't get a chance to investigate the story, what he said deeper, but he's usually on point. And he said at the time when the Central Park Five were unjustly arrested, then Donald Trump took out a full-page ad in the local newspaper calling for the lynching of these innocent young men, all of whom were under the age of 16 years old. And the reason I'm mentioning that because karma is something else, isn't it? Where we stand depends on where we sit. And the fact of the matter is that none of us lives in glass houses, and none of us should be throwing stones. The bottom line here is that we have a system that is very flawed. And we're so used to the poor being the victims of this system. We're so used to people of color who can't afford, and unfortunately, those are the dynamics. This is not about prejudice or racism. This is about truth. Unfortunately, many of them who can't afford high-priced lawyers end up in jail for years, wrongfully convicted. Everybody forgets about them but their immediate family. Many times when there's a breaking news story and we hear about someone coming out of jail as a free man, that's the only time we even think about them or recognize what was wrong. As a matter of fact, a week ago I saw another video where a man was walking out of jail after being in jail for, I think, 40 years, wrongfully convicted. This was after my 2 stories on the wrongfully convicted. And there was maybe a handful of people gathered around, and all the people who hugged him and cried were his immediate family. 40 years of your life. I know they talk about compensation for, I think it's $1 million a year or whatever, for every year you're wrongfully incarcerated. And people might say, well, 40 years, $40 million. I'm pretty sure that in most cases, maybe not all, but in most cases, like the man who did 40 years, he'd hand you back every single dime of that 40 million to get those years of his life back. We don't have the ability to buy youth. The years gone are gone. Tomorrow is a new day. When we wake up tomorrow, today is gone forever. No one can pay us enough money to get that back. So if you want to fight, fight for equality. If you want to fight, fight for fairness. If you want to fight, fight to make the justice system, the criminal justice system better and fair for all people, including people of color. Fight to make the criminal justice system so fair that riches, wealth don't matter. What matters is right and wrong. And when we find a way to do that, and we find that our heroes are caught up in the entanglement of the criminal justice system, when they're exonerated, we must feel good to know that they were exonerated based on the truth, just as the poorest beggar on the street would be exonerated. Until we change what we have in society now, where there's different standards for different folks, the fact that we get to the point where we're ready to leave our houses and put our lives on the line and march down to fight and stand and scream and shout and say hateful things and form organizations to protect someone who couldn't care less about us. This is the truth. Don't believe for 1 minute they do. Then the ones that are messed up, they're us. This has to stop. I don't want to see when whatever happens in New York, pandemonium break out. Although I would be honest with you, I have to say this. New York and the NYPD will not tolerate that. I don't know, I don't want to talk about Washington, what happened, but I can promise you that's not going to happen in New York. But the fact of the matter is, we need to respect each other enough to not only understand that we need to stand as one, but we also need to understand that when things happen with our leaders, that just how it plays out in court with us should be the same way it plays out in court with them. If they did nothing wrong, they'd be exonerated. It's a process. But all of us walking around thinking we have opinions. People who tell me, we looked on TV live and we saw people climbing the walls of the Capitol and people say, no, that was not, it never happened. I had someone look at me in my face and tell me it never happened. Those images of people pushing through the barricades and running over the Capitol Police, they looked at me in my face and said, no, don't worry what the TV showed you. Don't worry what you saw live. It never happened. If you thought about that for a second, let's put aside the fact of why it happened for a moment. Let's suppose you're one of those people who believes that, it should have been done. If you're that out there to believe that. But to tell me it never happened, that what the TV showed would have to have been a conspiracy of all the channels that were out there to sit down together and say, we're going to make this footage up. We're gonna film this thing somewhere. We're going to create something that looks like I'm going to come back and play it for the public. Is that what happened? When Mike Pence spoke, I think it was last week, about the fact that his family was in danger and he felt himself and his family was put in danger. That didn't happen. And now people are turning against Mike Pence, who was vice president to President Trump, because he doesn't agree with President Trump. When is it we've been so absorbed with this kind of celebrity that we're willing to put our lives on the back burner to idolize someone else? You'll idolize someone like a president or an actor, but you won't idolize God, your creator. You'll believe in a man, but you won't believe in the man or the Almighty who created you, I should say. I'm saying this to you because you need to stop and think. This hatred I see spewing all over Facebook needs to stop. These angry, hateful words that you can't take back needs to stop. These beliefs that because you feel that someone is right and you don't think they're being treated fairly, and most obviously you're not even thinking through the process, that you're going to go and you're going to make a stand and get yourself in trouble possibly, and you're going to get arrested and you're going to lash out against someone else because they don't believe in what you believe. We have the right as human beings to free speech, and we have the right for free thoughts. We don't have the right to decide that everyone else must think the way we do, or they're a body of people that should be hated. We don't have the right to create chaos when so many of us are fighting for peace. Whatever happens in the coming weeks, whatever happens in the coming years as we go to elections or whatever, we have to stop the hate against each other. If you know you can't have a political conversation without being hateful, then don't have the conversation. But this needs to stop. Stop the bomb threats, because we who live in New York have to deal with the chaos those bomb threats cause. You're affecting our lives, and for what reason? For an individual man? Do you realize, and I'll say this before I go, do you realize that out of all the things we think we can do, out of all the fights we think we can win, out of all the violence and hatred we can think up in our mind to spew, the one thing we can't do is predict if any of us, or which ones of us, will be here tomorrow, will wake up tomorrow morning. You can choose not to believe that we have a creator, someone more powerful than us, who governs over us, whose will is more powerful than our will. If you choose to believe that, then you have to believe that you can decide when you live and when you die and how you live and how you die. Every so often I hear of someone who I just saw a day before and the next day they're no longer with us. And the people we're fighting for, when it comes to life and death, face the same faith and the same Creator that we do, whether you like it or not. Choose to believe what you choose to believe in. You have that right. Making it a path towards violence and hatred and prejudice is not one that you should even entertain. We've got to learn that we live on this planet together. We share this life and this space together. And if we want to have a better future for our children, even for the rest of our own lives, then we've got to stand together to make a difference. Stop letting the puppet masters, and that's what I call them, our politicians in office, the puppet masters. Stop letting them manipulate you to the point that you stop thinking for yourself. I hope that you found this interesting. And I hope it'll give you enough thought that you really sit and think about the next decisions you make in regards to this. Let's work together to make the system fair and better, not filled with hatred and anger and prejudice, not filled with division because of the color of our skins. Let's make sure that we join together so that what matters does, and that is we're all humans sharing the same space in one world. After the same thing, hopefully, peace, love, and happiness. It's been a pleasure to be here with you once again. I'm so honored to have these conversations with you and to receive the feedback that I do. I'm thankful to all of you, even if we disagree, for your support and for your efforts to continue this conversation. Do have a safe weekend and a safe week ahead. And until we speak again, take care of yourselves and each other.